Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about something that's pretty serious. I want to talk about this though because I feel like people just see the success and see what I'm like as this happy, friendly person, don't actually know what I've been through to get to this point and how my career has gotten to this point. So I'm gonna be talking about my journey through depression and anxiety, and I have never really talked about this as openly on the internet. So if you're going to leave rude comments, I will block you. I am gonna be getting ready for the day too. Because this is a pretty serious tone video, I'm not gonna be talking too much about the products that I'm using. I have a ton of other videos where I do talk about the products I'm using during my Get Ready With Me's, so you can check those out. I have always been this overachiever type of person and still unpacking in therapy why I am this way, but I tend to use work as an excuse to get away from my problems and kind of like ignore my problems. When I was in college, I actually had really bad anxiety, but I didn't know that it was anxiety for a very long time. In college, I was an athlete and I was also an engineering major, and I was constantly busy all the time and always worried about how I was performing and how I was doing. And it didn't really occur to me that it was anxiety until I was actually at the end of my college experience, where I was like, why do I always feel like I'm not doing enough, or that I'm not being enough, or that I'm just not enough overall. I started therapy when I was in graduate school, so it was a year after me graduating from college, but I came to find out that it was anxiety. But the reason that I know that what I was experiencing in the past was anxiety was that I had a really hard time eating, where I couldn't eat certain foods, like certain foods made my stomach hurt, and I would have really bad stomach pains for the entire day, like after eating a very basic sandwich or like a regular meal. I thought it was because I was eating bad food, so I cut out like everything that was greasy and, you know, processed and everything, and I started eating really healthy, and I was still having a lot of like eating problems. At some points I would actually pass out on the field because I was so exhausted and just so drained overall. I remember one practice I was at, I told my coach, like, I just cannot stand anymore, my legs are gonna give out. And we're like, well, let's just do one more rep, let's just do one more. And I literally fell like walking to the cone to get set up for the drill, and I was like, I can't do this, like I need to stop. I did end up getting checked out by the doctors. We had athletic doctors that were specifically for athletes, and they basically told me that I had irritable bowel syndrome, and it came from me being anxious and being busy and doing all the things all the time. At this point though, I still did not go to therapy. Like, I was like, oh, everybody functions like this, everybody doesn't. So when I got to graduate school, it became significantly worse, where I was having panic attacks in my car. So driving to the lab in the morning, like I would just be crying, and like I couldn't catch my breath, and like I couldn't calm myself down, and I was just like constantly having panic attacks on the way to lab. But luckily I did know that there was a free therapy system for students at the school, so I started to go, and I realized that what I was doing at my job was causing my anxiety. So I was always feeling like I wasn't good enough at my job. So I would spend hours preparing for meetings. I would spend so much time thinking about how I would phrase things, how I would say different things. And then even after the meeting, I would think about how it went for like the next like 2 or 3 days, and run it back over my head like over and over and over again of, oh no, I did this wrong, or like, oh no, I need to change this, or no, I need to do that. I did go to therapy and worked with a therapist. It was great. I started to recognize like some of my triggers and some of the things that signaled to me that I was feeling anxious at the time. So some of the things that signaled to me that I am in a high anxiety moment is when I don't want to eat anymore. I have a significant decrease in appetite, and I also have an increase in sleep. So I just sleep so much when I am anxious. It was really helpful for me to go for the first year, but then I stopped going because the program was kind of based on like a certain number of sessions. So I had done my sessions, and my therapist was like, you're pretty good, you should be fine, you can, you know, go back to normal life. So I stopped going to therapy. Continued in graduate school, I went to class all the time. Like, I was doing things I was supposed to do as a graduate student until the pandemic hit. When the pandemic hit and everyone was home, I actually felt the least anxious that I had ever felt since I started graduate school, which was so uniquely different from everyone else in the pandemic, because people were anxious about what was going on and like how things would pan out, if we would be able to get tests or to get like a cure or, you know, a vaccine or whatever. But I felt so much relief because, one, I lived alone and I didn't have to interact with people at my job that were increasing my anxiety. And two, because I didn't have to be at work all day long. So I actually spent a lot of time exercising. I spent a lot of time painting. I loved doing the paint by numbers. Like, that was my therapy. I would also color. I started posting on social media. So I had all these creative outlets that were really helping me. And I didn't have the stressor of my job as it normally was. So I could do whatever. It was honestly the time where I felt the least anxious, and I felt like I was me again. But as soon as the restrictions lifted and I was required to go back to work, it got bad. And I mean like nothing that I had ever experienced before. So all the techniques that I had learned in therapy before just were not working. Breathing, yoga, like everything. I was doing everything that I was taught before and it wasn't working. And it was at a point where every day on my way to work, I would think about how fast I would need to drive into the median to unalive myself. And I was having these thoughts every single day on my way to work in the morning and then on my way home from work, and I knew it wasn't right. Like, I knew that I didn't feel like myself. I knew that I shouldn't be having these thoughts in the first place, and it was a really bad time in my life. And I was also still posting at the same time, so I don't think that people even knew that anything was going on outside of my like immediate family and, you know, maybe two of my friends that I was telling them to. That's another thing too. When I told my family, my parents, that this was how I was feeling and that like I know these things aren't okay, but I just couldn't stop myself from thinking these thoughts. It was kind of a crazy experience. So in some ways, I think my parents supported me in the way they knew how, but it just wasn't good. Their response just wasn't things that I needed to hear at that time, and honestly made it even worse. So I stopped talking to people outside of my therapist about what I was thinking. So, okay, I'm trying not to cry because oh my gosh. We're back. I'm gonna talk about contour so I don't lose it again. I'm going in with the Fenty contour in the color Espresso. I knew that the thoughts I was having weren't good and that I wasn't in a good place. So I went back to therapy. And the way that my therapist program worked at school was that they would kind of do like a triage. So you would get like an interview for your first session, and then they would kind of determine who you would be the best match with therapist wise. So I went to my like triage session, and you know, I was telling them about like the thoughts that I was having and everything, and literally the next day I was assigned to a therapist. So that's how I know that it was really bad, that I was in like a really bad place. I spent the next few months in therapy, also still going to work, also still posting, also still doing my life outside of therapy, and started to recognize just that a lot of things that I was doing was incredibly toxic for me. Like, I was working nonstop when I was going to the lab. I didn't have any hobbies outside of science. I didn't really have people in my life that I thought that I could trust and rely on. So there are a lot of things that were really contributing to my depression, which is the state that I was in at that point. And just to give you an idea of, you know, for anyone that may be going through something similar, that I started therapy the second time in June of 2020, and I have been in therapy ever since. I didn't feel cured, or I didn't feel like I was improving though, until about November of 2020. It takes a long time to get in a space where you feel comfortable and you feel like you're making progress, because mental health progress is so different from anything else that you would probably ever do in your entire life. I was in therapy for a long time with that specific therapist. I did end up getting a new one because she had moved, so it was totally unrelated to my own mental health. But I wanted to make this video to show people that sometimes it is your environment that is contributing so much to your anxiety, your depression, and your mental health. And though it's really hard to change and to take a leap of faith and to do something that is completely totally out there, like it is so incredibly helpful for your mental health. I know from experience. So even though I was in therapy the whole time, I was still incredibly unhappy with my situation. So I was in graduate school still. I wasn't making a lot of money at the time. I didn't really feel supported at my work. I didn't really feel supported at home, my like family and friends. And it took me a long time to realize that I needed to make a serious change to my life. And I think that was because I was having such really negative thoughts when I was depressed, and it took me a long time to get out of that. But when I realized that like I actually can change my life around and do whatever it is that I want, regardless of whatever people have to say, I was just like, shoot, I'm gonna go for it. At the time I was in graduate school, I was working in the lab every single day, sometimes 6 days a week. Actually, most times 6 days a week, especially near the end. I was in lab most days for, I would say 8 hours. And if it were more than 8 hours, it would be like, I would take 2 hours off and then I would go back to lab for another 2 hours, and I would take another 2 hours off, and then I go. So I was back and forth between the lab all the time. I didn't really feel like I had anything going for me in science because of my experience with my mentors and advisors and like everything that had gone on in my career up until that point. So I decided that I was going to take on content creation. And since then, I've moved to LA. I am no longer a scientist, although I am getting my PhD in a few days. So you will see that vlog. As soon as I moved here, I was so incredibly happy and feeling way more fulfilled in my life than I ever have up until this point. I was in a job where I just felt like I was living the same day over and over and over again, and I didn't really have anything that I was excited to wake up and do every single day. And now I live in a way better environment. It's almost always sunny in LA, so the weather definitely helps. But I'm also surrounded by people that are creative and encouraging and want to hear my ideas and value my opinions and want to hear about them and want to encourage me to do better and, you know, be a support system and be a mental health support system as well. So, oh my gosh, I just don't want to keep crying. Moving has been incredibly powerful and helpful for me. And it's almost like my depression has gone away entirely. I very rarely ever have anxiety nowadays. I do sometimes here and there. I think that happens, especially to someone like me who is, you know, recovering from depression. But I feel like so much better in my life now than I have ever felt in total. I'm only 27 years old, so I do have the experience in being in a place where I just felt so unfulfilled and so unworthy, and also like I didn't matter, to where now I'm in a place where I know I matter and I feel it, and with the people that I work with every day, and you know what I get to do online, and then also in my actual job. I now do commercials, which is super awesome, and I really love it. But yeah, I don't think I really told this story in a great way, but hopefully you all can, I guess, relate to it, or at least just know that if someone from the outside, like even if you haven't experienced depression or anxiety, like what it is like for someone who is going through it and how to be a better support for them. And looking back on it now, obviously I should have expressed to more people how I was feeling, but the reason why I didn't was because I just didn't feel comfortable enough to express to people what I was feeling. I didn't feel like they would respond well, and that was confirmed when I told, you know, my parents. I just didn't feel like they responded well to what I was going through and kind of dismissed my feelings and, you know, what was happening. So even if you can just be a support system to somebody who is going through something similar, and, you know, just hearing what they have to say and how they feel, I think it makes such a huge difference and really just like change their lives. But yeah, okay, I am going to put on some lipstick off camera. But thank you guys for listening and for watching this, and I hope it was helpful for someone.